Aloha, my name is Shelby Morrison, and I am the Programs and Communications Coordinator at ikahi Mediation Center. Welcome to our Finding Solutions Growing Peace Brown Bag Lunch Series. Ikahi is a nonprofit community mediation center serving East Hawaii. We were founded in 1983 as a program of the island of Hawaii's YMCA, and in 2006, we became our own independent nonprofit. We empower people to come together, to talk and to listen, to explore options, and to find their own best solutions. To achieve this mission, we offer mediation, facilitation, and trainings like this one to strengthen the ability of diverse individuals and groups to resolve interpersonal conflicts and community issues. Our Brown Bag Lunch series is held every third Thursday at 12 noon here on Zoom, and you do have to register on Eventbrite each time to receive that Zoom link. Our next Brown Bag Talk is on September 18th, and that will be with yours truly. And I will be talking on empowerment for women. So my talk will be titled Her Voice, Her Power, Reclaiming Sovereignty in Conflict. So if you're a woman that struggles to find her voice when conflict strikes, this one is for you. You can register for this on Eventbrite. The link is in the chat box. At the end of today's talk, we will ask you to fill out a short online survey, which helps with our grant funding for this free series. When I put the survey link in the chat at the end of the talk, please just take a minute and give us your thoughts. We will also be sending out an email a little bit later with the slides, the video link, and the survey link. So without further ado, let me introduce our topic, the ladder of assumptions, how mediators can maintain neutrality. And our speaker is Ms. Sandra DeLateur, Esquire, who is an attorney, mediator, and hearing officer based in Sunnyvale, California. After 25 years of practicing law, she limited her practice to alternative dispute resolution. She volunteers in several local community mediation programs and serves as a coach for local mediation trainings. DeLateur has served as a neutral for the Santa Clara County Superior Court and Bankruptcy Court, as well as several municipal rent stabilization programs. All right, Sandra, take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to get my presentation up and running. Just give me a moment, and I'm so excited to present to you today. All right, can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming to this talk. This is really a labor of love because the ladder of assumptions has been a really important part of my learning as a mediator. So the ladder of assumptions is a tool that you can use with anybody, with your parties, with your family. But today we're going to talk about the ladder of assumptions as something you can use to check in with yourself. So this is a talk that's not really about brand new skills. It's about using skills you have to check in with yourself as you go forward as a mediator. And I think all of us have learned that we need to keep some kind of a finger on our own pulse as we're going forward in a mediation. because sometimes we get sidetracked, or we all of a sudden decide that we're not relating to a party, or something is going on, and this ladder will help you as a tool. Some of you may have attended another talk I did about 2 years ago on the ladder of assumptions, which was very detailed. Today, we will touch on the ladder basics, but I'm going to present basically a scenario, a mediation, describe a mediation that I did, which really brought forth all sorts of concerns about my own neutrality. And I would like you all to participate, if you would, by putting some comments in the chat or asking questions as we go, sharing stories, because this is something where we're looking at ourselves and we need to be very honest. And it's hard to be honest that we maybe made an assumption, we realized we were biased, or we were going down a wrong path with somebody. So we're all going to learn from each other today. So please feel free to participate. So we're going to start with kind of examining assumptions a little bit, because the ladder really applies when you've made an assumption about something or about someone. And all human beings make assumptions. I think everybody is aware of that. We can't function if we microanalyze every bit of stimulus that we see, hear, feel, observe. So we have to make assumptions in order to function. And a lot of those things are great, right? It shortcuts a whole lot of thinking. But sometimes we make assumptions that are not based in good judgment or don't lead to good things. And that's what we want to look at. Now, as mediators, of course, we're trying so hard to be neutral. We are trying to set aside anything that might bias us against the parties or prejudice us against the dispute, or in any way influence our ability to be neutral and be fair and help the parties in this meeting where we have taken on the role of the mediator neutral. But we are a product of all our life experiences. Every one of us has a background, whether you grew up in a certain place, grew up in a certain culture, worked somewhere, went to school in a particular field or in a particular part of the country or part of the world. So we bring all of this into the room with us. And a lot of times that allows us to relate to people. And that's part of our beauty. It's part of what makes us who we are and the mediators that we are. But sometimes it goes awry. So we're going to explore how the ladder of assumptions might help with checking in with yourself, okay? I'm going to describe this really unusual mediation that I got involved in some time ago. And we're going to see how observable facts might lead to assumptions and loss of neutrality. Or maybe you want to just talk about it as, affecting how effective you are as a neutral. And I hope you'll bear with me. So I'm going to describe this mediation, which was billed as a contract dispute. And probably you've done a lot of basic contracts, a lot of landlord-tenant stuff. I assume people here have a very diverse background. But I was floored by this mediation because in one room, I had a group of people that had funded a bail bond for someone in their community. And in the other room, I had the owners of a bail bond business who were trying to collect because the person skipped bail. So I'm looking at you all and I don't see a lot of recognition. This is just so different than anything I had to do before. And also the personalities were very strong in this particular mediation. And that brought out some reactions from me and my co-mediator. So this is the context we're going into. Two sets of people, different room. They could not sit in the same room. A whole lot of people in one room and then a couple in the other room. Okay, so the first impression of my group in one room. This is what I observed. And remember, for the ladder of assumptions, you start with observable facts. You're using all your senses and you're not judging, you're not filtering them. You're just taking in information. So I was looking around the room and I saw a retired older woman, I saw two couples with young children who were actually with them in the mediation. A gentleman who introduced himself as a pastor of a church, and then another younger woman who seemed to be solo. They were dressed in what I would call business-like attire, but it might also be called going to meeting attire, going to church. They were dressed pretty nicely. When they welcomed me, they spoke to me very softly in sophisticated language. There was welcoming body language, right? They hold out their hand to shake your hand. They introduce themselves voluntarily. And it turned out they were all part of a church congregation. So at this point, I wondered if you would be willing to share what assumptions might come to mind for you, because I know some came to mind for me. So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds here and give you a chance to type into the chat, and then Shelby will help me with sharing those. Okay.
We have a
Shelby,
comment.
do we have any volunteers?
We have a comment. Quaker, possibly going to a meeting.
Okay.
Maybe you would assume they are honest, participating in good faith, will have reasonable positions.
Okay, I'm with this
Community-minded.
person. I was in the boat, same boat. I was thinking these are reliable people. They believe in justice. They believe in truth. They're probably telling the truth. They're probably really upstanding citizens. Anything else in that, Shelby, that would be similar?
We have some consolidated thinking, community-minded, trustworthy, crossed arms, maybe they're not happy to be there. Maybe they're educated, maybe beyond high school. Strength in numbers.
See, I thank you so much for all those ideas, because all those things went through our heads. Okay, and this is a first impression. This is when you first walk into the room with one side. And remember that whenever you hear the first story, the first person who speaks with you when the parties are separated, particularly, that's the start of how you think about a mediation. And so we were making these thoughts and assumptions about these people based on observable facts, right? What we saw, what we heard, what we felt. And then we built on that. And we're going to talk about that as part of the ladder, is we built on it and we interpreted what we saw and felt and heard and came up with kind of an assumption about them, right? So those are wonderful thoughts. Thank you for sharing. Now I switched to the other room and was kind of, blown away. We walk into the room and there is no welcome feeling at all. Okay. It was a husband and wife. They were the owners of the bail bonds business. They didn't smile. They were, they had tattoos all over them. Their clothes were clean and neat, but clearly casual. They were not dressed up for this event. He had, long hair with a gray beard and mustache, looked a little rough around the edges to me. And what really hit us the minute we walk in, I don't think we'd sat down, is they announced that they don't know why they're in the mediation and they're not going to stay long. So what kinds of assumptions might come to mind there?
Closed-minded, defensive, self-interested, draconian.
Right. All of those
Misleading,
things.
not trustworthy, defensive, authoritarian, their way or the highway, oppositional, lots of defensive. They're not going to be cooperative nor collaborative.
But thank you all for those things, because I think if we're honest, we do make these kinds of leaps just from seeing people or hearing them. We're observing their tone, we're observing their body language. And even though we want to be neutral, even though we want to be completely unbiased, our background will in fact create some of these conclusions that may or may not be true, right? So thank you for sharing all those. We're going to keep going. So that's an introduction to my parties in this scenario. I want to do a very quick review of how the ladder of assumption works. And this is from a book called Conflict Resolution in Daily Life, a practical handbook for reaching agreement, which was written by Dr. Jack Hamilton and Elizabeth Seaman. They are wonderful people and friends of mine. They've been mentors to me. And I find that the ladder of assumptions is a very useful tool. And so I want to go over it with you just in case you either don't remember or you missed the prior talk. Oh, apparently I lost some. Okay. So here is my ladder. The very first rung of this ladder is the observable facts. This is what we were talking about earlier. What did you see? What did you hear? What did you feel? What did you notice? So these are using all your senses, even your sixth sense, your spidey sense, whatever it is, to pick up observable facts and look at how they are. And then we'll talk about this. So the next rung as you go up the ladder is your interpretations of those facts. So we just talked about some of the interpretations from just meeting the parties for the first time, right? We're taking what we see and hear and interpreting them based on our experience. And sometimes when we're dealing with people, we attribute motives to the other side, if you will, of a dispute or another person without really knowing. I mean, we're just sure. And I have, thought about a couple of very common examples of this. When you go into a store or restaurant and somebody gives you good service, right? We might attribute the motivation to, oh, they really, really want a good tip. Or we might say, they really enjoy their job. Or something along those lines. When you get upset with someone, a lot of times you attribute a negative motive. Or if there's a consequence to what happens, you immediately assume they're out to get you or something like that. One example might be if you're pulled over by a cop. I don't know about you, but my stomach falls out if I am pulled over. I immediately assume I'm getting a ticket, right? I've done something wrong. So my fact is that I'm pulled over. My interpretation is, oh my gosh, the cop is trying to find fault with me. And the motive is, oh, well, he needs to meet his quota of tickets today, right? Now, what would happen if I'm pulled over and the cop comes up to the window and says, ma'am, your taillight is out. You need to go get it fixed. I just want you to know. Then the motivation might be entirely different in my mind, right? He's no longer the cop who's trying to meet his quota. He's the cop that's being very helpful and kind and serving the community. So these are different ways we go up the ladder. The next rung is called generalizations, which is how we categorize people. Some people might use the word stereotype, but these are what we would consider overgeneralizations, right? Because you take a specific instance and you then say, well, it's always like that. This group always does this. This type of person always does that. All right? And a lot of these things are very unfair. And I think as mediators, we rarely get to this point, but I just want to illustrate how you would go up the ladder. And there is one more step, which is you take action based on this whole process in your brain. So there's a lot of things you can do before you get to actions, but if you really follow this to a T with a certain situation or a certain person, you sometimes get to the point where you take action based on maybe a whole lot of thinking that it wasn't correct because you've allowed yourself to go up the ladder. And this is something that we use to help people who make assumptions in mediation. And I think all of us have had that experience where we have a party who makes a generalization about the other side and you sort of walk them back and say, why do you say that? What is your basis for that? What did you see or hear that made you think that? But in this talk, I want to talk about looking inside, checking in with yourself. So if you find yourself getting irritated with a party, let's say, take a look at where you started. What set you off? What interpretation did you make from that observation? What kind of motive did you attribute to that person possibly? All right. Or did you generalize and stereotype? And then you felt irritated. So I'm just saying this is something you can use to go back and look at your own thought process as well as helping other people. So before I go on, are there any questions about the basic ladder? No? All right. So now we're going to go back to this very unusual mediation between the group of people who bought a bail bond for someone in the congregation and the bail bonds owners, bail bonds company owners. So as we got to know them a little bit more and things were shared, we found out that the group believed that the accused member of the congregation, the person that was the criminal defendant in this situation, they believed he was innocent. They were so convinced of it that they thought that the bail bond would never be called in. All right. So they were willing to put their homes up as security for the bond. And I don't know if any of you have had any experience with bail bonds, but this group had to put up 10% of the total amount of the bond ordered by the judge. But they never thought they'd have to pay the next 90% of it. The accused person fled to Mexico. He didn't just skip the state. He fled to Mexico. And the bail bondsman came after this group to pay the remaining amount of the bond. And then this group admitted they didn't read the fine print about the costs of recovering a fugitive. I mean, if you are convinced that this will never come into play, and you're under a time deadline, and this is very stressful, they didn't read that part of it. So are there any assumptions that would change for you or that would come up for you after hearing a little more about their side in this mediation?
In the comments, we see they are naive, or they were duped by the congregant, or no, groupthink prevailed.
Yep. I think those are all reasonable things that happen to us when we hear something like this. I mean, on one hand, we have this group who seemed to be very sophisticated based on how they greeted me, how they first started in the mediation. But then all of a sudden, we have a problem because they didn't really know what they were getting into. Okay. And so, yes, there are some issues about naivete here, maybe some issues of being a little blinded because they didn't even consider that a person who was arrested for a crime might be guilty. Okay. So yes, very interesting. And I agree with those comments. So now we're going to go over back to the bail bonds company people. And even though they threatened to leave very quickly, they actually stayed and they talked to us. And part of what made them happier to speak with us after a little while was we asked them an open-ended question about bail bonds. Like, we admitted we didn't know really how they work. And so they were very proud of their business and they explained the process, right? And one of the things that came out that we heard very clearly in their explanation was that they believe themselves to be an integral part of the justice system. Now, I don't know how many of you are attorneys. I'm an attorney, but I don't do criminal work. So I really never dealt with bail bonds people. And it surprised me a little bit to hear that they thought they were such an essential part of the justice system. And they wanted the respect that went with that. They also wanted us to know that they were very, very astute business people because they took enough security collateral to cover more than the $1.3 million bond. And that bond was the largest they had ever done. So all of those things were really important to them. So when the person skipped bail, they had to hire a bounty hunter and one that knew it could bring him back from Mexico. All right. So those are all really important facts that they were willing to share with us because we were open-minded enough to let them explain what they do and how they do it, and even a little bit about the company itself that had been around for over 30 years. So does any of this raise more assumptions for you or change assumptions that we made earlier?
Owners trying to do their job.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Proud of their integrity. Yes, they have felt cheated. They are more cooperative than first expected.
I agree with all of those comments. I think that for us, it was a switch from here are people who were just showing up and they're not willing to share anything, they're not willing to discuss this matter, to they're willing to, but they needed us to be really ready to listen. They didn't want to be dismissed. And what they expressed to us was basically they had a chip on their shoulder, that they felt bail bondsmen get a short shrift, that they're not considered real businessmen. Okay, this is a legitimate business in their mind, and they want the respect and the attention of the people involved, rather than just being dismissed. So I agree with all of those comments. Thank you again for sharing. I think that one of the things that really threw me was that they admitted this was the largest bond they had ever done in 30 years, okay, or more than 30 years. And so we asked them, why did you do that? And they said, well, the other side begged us. They begged us to issue this bond, okay? So that was an interesting point as well. So here comes a little twist in this dispute, because we knew that the bail bondsman was trying to collect the remainder of the bond. But what really fueled this particular dispute was that the group challenged two sets of expenses. One was the bounty hunter fee, which was $225,000, and the other was bribes. So they had to bribe Mexican authorities to the tune of $30,000 over 2 months to find the guy, and the authorities agreed not to tip him off, because apparently that's what was happening, is he would keep moving on, but then he would get tipped that the bounty hunter was right behind him. So both of these things were additional to the $1.3 billion bond. I think one of the interesting arguments that the group made was that they not only didn't realize they were responsible for the bounty fee, but that they had no say in who was hired and what his fee was. So that was a real point of contention, because they thought they could have hired somebody cheaper, which is an interesting point because they had no context in this, in this world. And the bail bondsman explained to us that he has a whole range of bounty hunters that have different specialties that are available, and he had to pick the right one for the job. And so they wouldn't know how to do that. So that was a really interesting point. And I know that there must be some attorney mediators in this group. I don't know how many of you are, but I would love to have you share what you think about people having to repay the amount of the bribes. It's not like there are receipts for that, So are there any assumptions or information or sharing you'd like to do about this very unusual part of the contract? All right, well, I'm going to pose a question. Shelby, did you have some?
Yeah, there's a comment that it was maybe just part of the business or no receipts.
Yeah. I mean, at one point, this group of very nice, churchgoers wanted a receipt for the bribes, and bail bondsman said, "That doesn't happen. Can't do that." But I have their word that they had to pay this money. The bail bondsman told me he had to pay it. I had to pay it. Now you have to pay me. So I also thought, though, as an attorney mediator, it's very hard not to comment on the fact that the $225,000 might be more recoverable than the $30,000 in bribes if you're ending up in front of a court. So at what point, as an attorney mediator, do you just not say anything about this and the legality or illegality of it? Or do you want to weigh in? Does anybody have any comments about, would you weigh in at all about the recoverability of these things?
We have a comment. As a mediator / arbitrator, I would consider the bribe if there was enough information to prove it was paid. Another comment, I think you need to address it. It was brought to your attention. Another, well, is it equitable for the bondsman or bounty hunter to pay?
Okay, very good comments. I mean, I think this is a tough one. I think this is really tough because this not only is there a legality issue, I think here, and a collectability issue, but the people that put up the bond did not realize this would be tacked on to the total amount of the bond. So this is, they're now looking at the bail bondsman wants the 1.3 million plus another, basically 250,000. This is a lot of money. And the average person doesn't have the ability to come up with much money. And he holds collateral. He holds their houses to support their payments. So this was a big deal for everybody. I just thought it was kind of fascinating. So the other assumptions I'd like to talk about is kind of their motivations to mediate. And this is in the context of this mediation, but I think it applies to all mediations. Do you all ask point blank what brought you here today? Or what do you want to see come out of this mediation? How do you phrase it, if you're willing to share, about trying to get to the motivation, the reason they're there?
What is your goal?
Okay. Yeah, I think there are a lot of ways you can ask the question.
What are you hoping to get out of this mediation?
Right. So I think there's an awful lot that you can do to get, as they say, the bottom of it. What is everybody's need, right? How do you address those needs in a mediation? In this particular case, we found out there were the stated mediations and mediation motivations, and then there were, of course, other things below the surface. So for the group of 5 people, their stated motivation was to avoid foreclosure on a little old lady's home. There was actually one person who couldn't be at the mediation. She was not well, but she was the one who had the house with no liens with all the equity. And the bail bondsman had already told them that that was the first one he was going after. So they were trying to prevent that. They also just wanted to minimize the additional charges because they felt it was either unfair or unconscionable, or however you want to describe it. They were not happy with the extra about 250,000 on top of the original bond. So we asked why. Why are you here? What do you want to accomplish? How would a resolution look for you? What would a good resolution look like? And we found out there was a lot of other reasons why they wanted to mediate. So you can imagine this pastor and a group of people in a church have basically been taken by somebody, right? They were taken advantage of. So they wanted to save face. They wanted to keep everyone from losing any home, right? So they wanted to make sure that not only was the little old lady safe, but all of them were safe in their homes. And they really wanted to do a payment plan. Whatever they owed the bounty hunter, they wanted to do a payment plan over time and not lose their homes. There was also a real schism in their church because of everything that happened. So they were trying to save friendships and relationships among themselves, this little group and the bigger community. So all of those things came into play. So it was another lesson for us on not making assumptions that you've got it down, their motivation, whatever they state at first is all there is, right? So that was just really good to get into, and it took a while for people to admit that they were concerned about things like saving face when they were, the original idea was we're all about money. So we went to the bail bondsman as well, and we asked the bail bondsman, what brought you here if you don't want to be here? Because he was really clear, and his wife spoke a little bit. It was mostly him. He was really clear about not wanting to be there, and he didn't consider the time to be well spent at first. And he definitely needed to make sure that we all knew that he had a successful business and wasn't going to take more than the minimum amount of time. And the reason I say that is that we all had to go to the town he was in. As mediators, we drove an hour and a half to meet with him because he would not come to where we normally mediate. So when we asked him, all right, you didn't want to be here. You think you have a slam dunk case in court. What's your motivation? Why are you here? And he said an interesting thing. He said he wanted to understand why the other side was opposing him and what they thought was a reasonable solution. So he wasn't as closed-minded as he first appeared. So we did a lot of probing and found out that he was really quite reasonable in some ways, even though our first impression of him was that he wasn't going to budge, he wasn't going to share, he was going to march out, after half an hour. Okay. Now, to give him some credit, he also listened to his attorney, because there was an attorney in each room, and the attorney in the bail bondsman room was not friendly. She couldn't be friendly to us while he was standoffish, but she did tell him to give it a try, and she was supporting us. So that was really good. So we probed a little further, and it turned out that even though he had this collateral in the homes, he really didn't want to foreclose on the homes. He just wanted money. So he was willing to consider another alternative, right? It's just that it had to be efficient. He felt he'd already gone through a lot. He didn't want to drag it out much longer. And as I said earlier, he was very proud of his business. He felt he had a chip on his shoulder, and so he got a chance to express himself through us. So he told us about himself and his business, but we took that and helped the other side understand some of his concerns and his feelings, and that was really helpful. And again, he was trying to earn respect, and this is the last thing that he really needed was gratitude. And we were a little surprised by that because he was so gruff, and it's a business, businesses don't always get thanked. But it turned out that because the group of the churchgoers had begged him to do this rather large bail bond that he didn't normally do, he thought he deserved a thank you. And he said he really never got it. That once the bail bond was in place, everybody was still kind of rushing around. And then when the fellow skipped town, and then they had this dispute over getting him back and the cost of it, he just never got a thank you from this group that he thought he had bent over backwards to help. So that was just another part of asking those questions and not assuming things that, maybe you wouldn't, I don't know how to express this very well, but you might think you've gotten to everything. And so you constantly have to ask curious questions. Is there something else? Do you want to share anything more? Is there anything more you'd like me to take to the other side? All those questions that allow people to add on, right? They've already told you a lot, but they get to add on. Does anybody else have really great ways to probe without seeming like you're probing? No? Okay. Well, maybe they'll come up later. So this is just a slide to remind you that as you're going through the mediation, you're questioning the parties, you're finding out information from them, but you're also questioning yourself. You are checking in with yourself and making sure that you are not making too many unfounded assumptions or cutting off potential avenues of resolution because you're thinking a certain way. So keep asking yourself, am I really being neutral here? Am I being biased? Or admit that you've made an assumption, now you need to back down. And that's my next slide, is if you go up the ladder, you can always go down the ladder. Okay, it works both ways. So most mediators will probably not go up all the rungs in a mediation. I would hope you would not get to taking action on the wrong thing or on some unfounded assumption, but you might go up it a little bit. And I think we've all talked about that a little bit in this talk now, that it's easy to kind of make a conclusion, but then you have to be able to change it as you get information or as you realize that you're not being totally honest about how you feel about something. So check in with yourself, reset if you need to, or reevaluate why you came to a conclusion. So we talked about curious questions, keeping an open mind. These are pretty basic, but it's a good reminder that we are human too, and we still need to keep an eye on how we are thinking. If you really find yourself climbing up a ladder of assumptions or feeling a little uncomfortable with someone, take a break. We tell the parties where I mediate, they can always ask for a break. They don't even have to explain it. You know, they can just say, I really need 5 minutes, and that's that. I would say that for a mediator who's starting to feel a little bit off or feel like they're not in control of their own thoughts and what they're doing, take a break. You can also check in with your co-mediator if you have one. I think a co-mediator is an awesome, awesome compliment because they're observing you as well as everybody else in the room. And you can ask them a question, see how you're coming off, let's say, or you can just check in with them and say, hey, is it just me or does he seem to be giving off vibes of XYZ, right? So use that tool as well. It's at your disposal. And be kind to yourself because we are all human and we all do the best we can. I think if you make assumptions, you just need to forgive yourself and reset, right? It's a human thing. And then remember too that everybody in the room needs your kindness. So be kind to yourself and be kind to everyone else. And use all the skills that you've been taught. And I think you must be awesome at what you do. I think mediators in general undersell themselves. They don't realize how really good they are because we're looking for perfection. So that's the basic scenario. I'll take any questions about what I've spoken about and any comments that you might want to share.
Feel free to unmute yourself, or you can use the raise hand feature, or of course you can use the chat. We do have a couple questions. So one question, how was this mediation conducted up to this point that you've described? Was it via private messages or was any of this in joint session?
Good question. It was done in person and they refused to do a joint session, so it was all separate.
And what was the outcome of that mediation?
Good question. We did not get to an agreement right at that moment, but the attorneys involved really worked with the parties after the session for quite some time. It took a few months actually, but they came to an agreement. So I believe it was a payment plan over time. And if they met the payment plan, the bail bondsman wouldn't touch the houses.
And what happened with the bribe money?
Here, I'm going to put up one slide and then saying thank you, and then also get off the sharing here. And let me hang on.
And Sandra, if you want to turn your camera on, we can see your beautiful
That's what I was going to
face.
do. I was trying to get back to there. All right.
There we go.
Sorry. So the issue with the bribe, you know what? I'll be honest, the attorneys didn't tell me that detail. So I am going to suspect that the bail bondsman waived that if they paid the rest.
We have another question. What happened to the criminal?
Ultimately, he was convicted and he went to jail. So he was guilty according to our system anyhow. But can anybody here really relate to the fact that his church congregation was sure he was innocent. Like they couldn't even imagine that he was guilty. No, okay. Well, I really think it was an interesting mediation. I hope you enjoyed hearing about it. I've never done anything quite like it since. And I also wanted to stress that the ladder of assumptions is a wonderful, wonderful concept. And if you would like to read the book written by Elizabeth and Jack, I think you would get a lot out of it. There's a lot of examples in there of how it has been used very successfully.
Charlene, go ahead.
Hi, Sandra. I used to
Hi.
mediate with you when you were at
I remember.
I'm now mediating with West Hawaii
Oh,
Mediation.
wonderful.
Yeah, and I was one of the authors with Jack and Elizabeth on the very first edition of the book.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you using a case study to explain how the ladder could be used by the mediators. And I have also used it sometimes when I've heard parties essentially make assumptions about the motives of the other side.
Yeah.
And I will often use myself that, well, this party said this, and we don't really know what that person's motivation is. A lot of times I don't know my own motivations for doing things, so I'll kind of put it on myself, but just slowing it down and pointing out that this is what they shared, and they've made a little jump without me having to literally explain the ladder or anything.
Right. I agree with you, Charlene. I think that's a marvelous way to do it. And one of the things I run into is in mediations is parties immediately assume the worst of the other side. And I try to get them to reevaluate that. Very good. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Well, thank you all. This has been just a wonderful experience, and thank you for participating as much as you did. It was just great.
All right. Well, if we have no other questions, we will go ahead and end our presentation for today. Thank you all so much for coming. And as a reminder, please just take a minute to fill out our survey. It does help with our grant funding for this free series. You can find that survey link in the chat. And be sure to also check your email in the coming days for slides, the video link, and again, that survey link. So mahalo to Sandra. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully I see you all next month.
Thank you to everybody.